apparently I made the statement that even one person could make the world a better place. They just have to get off their bum and do something about it. And someone, Russell Barker, come to me the next day and said, Brent, you said you're going to make the world a better place, so what are you going to do about it?
Hello, and welcome back to An Eye on the Future. In this episode, I continue my discussion with Brent, focusing on his current research in accounting and sustainability. We'll touch on topics like the impact of COVID-19, Brent's early career, and the Earle College Coast Run. So I suppose so far we haven't talked all that much about accounting, which is, I guess, where your current focus is.
Well, it's about how people learn accounting, and I think, you asked the questions because I did think it's got a pretty important role, especially for our world.
Well, so I suppose accounting has a pretty big reputation, whether it deserves it or not, of being quite dull. Do you think it deserves it? Probably not, since you're in it. And what inspired you to follow a career in it?
Probably what inspired me to follow a career in it was I was pretty good at it. That'd be pretty good at those things. I found it pretty easy. Boring. Yeah, look, that's not unfair. But the thing is, if you want to talk about a career in accounting, and depending what you do, you don't spend much of your time doing what you think about as accounting work, because accounting is really a way of thinking. I talked to you before. I'd give people the financial statements, and then they'd say, "Well, what does this mean? What do I do about this?" So, if there's so many different types of accountants now, but if you took, accountant in public practice, that what they'd spend a pretty high proportion of their time doing is helping people improve the performance of their business. So, and especially, some would just be doing tax returns. Look, I would find that boring. I quite early in my career, I would have done 50% of my time on tax work and probably 50% of my time on helping people improve their business. And so, as much as we hate generalization, you've got people who want to pay as little tax as they can, and that can be done. And you've got people that want to get the best return they can out of the resources they got. Now, what I found that both of those groups were probably successful, but those that were focused on getting the best return out of their assets they had at their disposal probably had a better lifestyle. Probably, in fact, I say made more money, but the returns people want from business, especially owner-operated business, is not all about money. It's a bit more that in a bigger business, because that's the way they're judged. It's about giving the shareholders a return, and the only return you can give shareholders is really money. But in an owner-operated business, there's a whole host of other returns that the owners can get.
A bit more community stuff and
community,
employees,
giving people jobs, and it might be working less hours, it might be doing different types of work, it might be making that contribution to the community. Now, it's a lot easier for someone who, as an owner-operator, to make the decision, well, I'm pretty comfortable. I also want to put a big effort into making a contribution to the community. You change the way we do business, have a more environmentally sustainable way I operate the business. Provided they've got some basic things in place. Whereas it's harder in a larger business. If you've got shareholders, on the stock exchange, the fact that you're doing a great thing for the community, The superannuation fund doesn't necessarily totally care about that. They care about the returns they get for their share, for their, the people that are in funds they've entrusted with, because that's the way those people will judge them. So in some ways it's a bit easier with the owner-operated business. Look, we should think about what accounting is in a sense. The role of the accountant is to make things visible so that people can make decisions. And that's somewhat analogous to me. I talked before about the books all around the floor, and you get a bookshelf and it's labelled and you put them all up there. So it's far easier to see where things are, to know what gaps I've got, to know where I'm strong. So, that's what accountants need to inform people about, so they can make decisions on how they use their resources. Now, this is what I believe, I think it's what I believe, is that the most important thing we have as a society at the moment is to use our resources wisely. Because we're not, the planet's not sustainable the way we're living. I hear, we've got climate change deniers, but even if you didn't believe in climate change, do you believe in pollution? Do you believe in rising sea levels? Do you believe in increasing salinity? Do you believe in the problem we have with plastics? There's just so many areas we have that society's not using resources as well as they are. And interesting with COVID, there's a lot of things we've changed, and we've talked about how the economy's gone down, but this is probably a good time to think about really how we in fact measure some of those things. Of course, the economy's down because there's not as much money being spent on things like transport at the moment. But how much of that does actually make us worse off? The fact that we've got all these people working from home and they're not spending their $6 a day to catch the bus or the train and sit on it for 1 hour, 2 hours on the way in and the way back. So because of that, we say our economy is contracting, but as a society, are we worse off? When we talk about how economy is going, actually, we're sort of measuring how many resources we use, not the quality of our life. So one thing that has happened in COVID is that we have used less resources in certain areas. Yep. Now, it'd be good to keep some of that, and we need to probably think about how we do value things. Questions we've had to decide on is, what are we prepared to give up on? And it seems like there's a lot of people may be quite happy to give up on travelling an hour a day or 2 hours a day or 2.5 hours a day. Now, not everyone, but a lot. But that's in fact making everyone's life better. Well, you might say it's not making if you owned a bus company.
Yeah, not everyone's, but
yeah.
I guess if you're saving 2 hours of commute, you can reallocate even just that time to other things.
Yeah, and then we've got to find, though, how do we use those resources that otherwise would have been used? And we could go into a bit of a spot where we in fact use more resources for a while, because we've still got that infrastructure in place. So if the train goes in from the Blue Mountains to the city and it's only got half the amount of people on it, it's still going to use up the same amount of resources. So there is some restructuring we need to do, but it will really help us to rethink where our society goes and what's important to us. And do we need to spend all this money on building new freeways into the city? Do we need to? So they're questions I can't answer, but that's part of it. So that's Your question was, is accounting boring? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I guess since we got on the topic of coronavirus, I suppose with all the contact tracing, tracking everyone, it seems somewhat that is an accounting solution, and it's the best thing we've got at the moment. Would you?
Well, so the app we've got doesn't seem to have worked that well, and look, I think a real accounting solution for that, and this is where we've got conflicts because there's a real privacy issue. The real accounting solution would be to measure a lot more, and so to find out, where are, not only who's got it and who can we track, where did they catch it, what were they doing, what were they doing beforehand, so we could get some predictive ability about it. So we could predict right out that these are the things likely to happen, and we might learn, okay, there's some really bad places to go. Now, clearly, nursing homes not good, but it wouldn't help much in that. But we're finding pubs are not real good. Now, and maybe they are. They're just getting some bad press at the moment. But if we could get data out of that to find out, righto, what are the challenging areas? What are the areas we need to address most? We know intuitively that it would be more dangerous going to a pub than it would be going bushwalking, but are there some grey areas in the middle? Is it almost as safe to go for a cup of coffee as it is to go bushwalking? I suspect not, but it might be. And the other thing, it seems that shopping centres are really safe. So. Or that, but it'd be nice to confirm that, to know you could go out, shopping and it's pretty good. And look, part of it could be just that pubs are in fact safe, but if the guidelines were adhered to, but they're not being adhered to because it's harder for people to adhere to them if they've had a few drinks. And is it the location which is the problem, or the behaviour of the people? That's the problem. If look, a real thing, and this, I guess, this is the accounting thinking, is for COVID. I think a big step forward would be testing, and I know there's a fair bit of work. We've got a number of different tests, but it seems like they take a fair while to process results. It'd be, what would be a great bit of research for someone, a great discovery would be to come up with a breathalyzer for COVID. Could you imagine if you could identify straight away, someone had a test, just like if someone's over 0.05, and you could find out that quickly. Here's COVID, like, wow, that would make life so much better. Would identify people straight away. People could be getting treatment straight away. They're not going to be spreading stuff straight away. Like, that would be a massive step forward. Maybe not as big as a vaccine, but it would be be better than a contact tracing app, because you wouldn't need the contact tracing app. You just need to test someone, and you've got it. And we'd also, I guess, probably want that to be pretty cheap. But
I guess that's some of the challenges.
Yeah, but I'd, so if you ask for an accounting solution, you always try to go back as early as possible to where the problem is, and see if you can solve it there. So as early as I think you could go back at the moment is to identify someone's just got to do a test and they could do it. It would be conceivable that an app might eventually have some predictive ability, mixed with some AI, and predict what people are likely to get it. You'd probably identify your super spreaders more, would have more information about it. But and it's been interesting, the the countries that don't seem to be doing the testing as much seem to be facing a bit more of a challenge. Though the US says now it's picking up its testing, but they took a fair while to get to it, right? Probably just, I think they've got a pretty high ratio of the people they test, and the people that are positive.
I saw an article today which was a third of all kids that were going in testing positive.
Wow, third of all kids
in Florida.
Right.
So I guess that's somewhat skewed data in that it's only those that have symptoms in the first place or are worried.
Yeah.
But that's still quite huge, since the overall percent in Australia, we've had a bit over 10,000 confirmed cases, but over 3 million tests, I think. I'm not sure what the number is at the moment, but that's...
Yeah, look, and that's, our testing's pretty widespread now, so it's, I think we've got fairly extensive testing now. And, in part, maybe that's why Victoria's numbers are really shooting up at the moment. They're doing a very high amount of testing. So if they stayed the same level of testing, they probably wouldn't be shooting up as much. But still, I'm glad they're doing the testing. But so that's a bit of a scary spot.
Because otherwise it's somewhat active. The virus is a bit of a guerrilla warfare tactic.
Yeah, well, we do see, and how it gets into New South Wales. But I guess New South Wales is acting as a buffer for Queensland at the moment. And look, here's a big thing. We think we've done a great job, and we think that the USA and Brazil have done a really bad job. But it is conceivable, if we go down the track in 2 or 3 years, that's where we've really got to make the decision. It could be that, righto, people are getting it, then they learn how to get on with life and get over it. And we're still struggling to keep people out, and it could get in here eventually, and we could have a really high death rate after all. We did get to manage to delay it for a year, and that could happen. Look, I really don't think that will happen, but there's the phrase of knowing what we know in hindsight. So the real hindsight for this won't be for a few years down the track.
Right. So, in terms of your research in accounting, you've mentioned before to me that you've been looking at stuff like big data. What was the other thing?
Well, sustainability is stuff that I'm pretty interested in, but I guess I've got, if I want to look to a solution, I'd say there's other people can do big data better than accountants. I was looking at big data pretty early on. Like when I first looked at it, I used to call it metrics. Before the name big data come along, it was just that we've got all these metrics, which is giving us all this information. But it's now a mathematical thing. So there's a lot more people that have better mathematical mind than me. I can see the structure of big data, and I can see the relationship it has to accounting. And sustainability has become incredibly important to me. However, I think the biggest contribution I can make is to help people become more skilled in accounting. I was saying to you before, I think the big role accounting has is for people to understand how to make decisions better about how we use our resources more. And also, accounting is a way of thinking. Now, you could do philosophy, you could do a whole host of other things and have a way of thinking, possibly better than accounting. But, you just got to go to Facebook and see the things that people think are true, and they've clearly got no logical concept. If you want to put stuff in terms of accounting, say for people's thinking, they think just about in terms of the income, but not in terms of the expense. They want governments to do all these things, do this and do that. Well, there's another side. There's cost to those things as well. So, whenever you do one thing, you're using those resources, and there's an opportunity cost. Those resources could be used for something else. So I would like people to have the skills to appreciate some of that stuff. I know, cliche again, there's two sides to every story. Now, in fact, it's much more nuanced than that. And that's the thing that we have become a bit of a polarized society. It seems we've tried to, and that could be the internet in a sense that's done that. We seem to have shorter attention spans, and we've become a more digital society. We've become a more digital society in two ways. We're more digital in terms of what's available online, but we're more digital in terms of there's only two solutions to this. There's this or this. Well, we know solutions to things are far more nuanced than that. There's a continuum of solutions, and those solutions are somewhere on that continuum. And politics has had a fair bit to do with that. You've either got to have, there's a, they seem to think people are dumb, and they're playing to that dumbness. We've got the simple message. Maybe this is a problem of marketing. We've got to get the message across. We've got to get the message package. What's your message? And it's all, we hear about keeping your message simple.
Yep.
Now, a problem with keeping the message simple is we're not becoming good thinkers. We're not becoming good at solving problems. We're not having the dialogue that we need to actually work out what the solutions are. And sustainability is a really big one for that. There's either we have coal or we don't have coal. Now, there's, clearly coal's really bad for the environment, but if we mined a lot less and we produced a lot less, and we mined it in a different way, and maybe we refined it in a different way, coal still probably has a role in our society. And what we probably need to work out is what is that role, instead of saying we either have it or we don't. Now, an area where that become a lot more clear cut, well, not more clear cut, which will be a much bigger challenge, would be something like meat. Say, take beef cattle. Now, it seems that beef cattle are pretty big contributors to climate change. Now, do we want to have no meat? That we've probably got a vegan group that says, we don't want any meat at all. But are there other solutions that we, in fact, have less cattle, which would mean we'd have to pay more for them? Maybe we feed them differently, so they produce different combinations of gas. Now, that's where some type of accounting skills might come in for the farmers, because they could then start making decisions of saying, righto, well, there's not the current future in beef is not there. It's not going to be about mass production and big feedlots, or maybe it will be feedlots. We've got to have all cattle inside, and they can never go outside, and we've got to trap all the atmosphere. I know that could be a solution, but I think righto, we've got to get a higher price for what we do. So we need to process it more. We need to also, in feeding our cattle, in breeding our cattle, we probably need to breed more for low gas emissions. So that's what I think about. Why accounting's got to help people is make decisions. Not about either there's we want a government and there's two choices: we have beef cattle or we don't have beef cattle, or we don't have any cattle, or we don't have any meat production. So they're questions we need to understand as a society. And so I think a pretty big contribution, well, I think the biggest contribution I can make is to help people learn accounting skills more so they can be educated for making decisions in the future. I've in fact probably done a lot less of the research I thought I would have gone into a university. It was a bit of a shock to me going in a university and then to find that effectively students subsidise most of the research, and portion of the student fees. Now I've got a serious problem with that. And again, you want to talk about stuff that's not sustainable? I'm not sure that's sustainable. So, and that's something we need to fix as universities. The way that I was able to cope with that, if I was wanting to do research, is that I had to do research that made the lives of my students better. And so that was right. How do you learn accounting more effectively? How do you learn more? How do you learn it quicker? So I would say, if I look, the focus of my research at the moment, I'll qualify this in a bit, it's probably what I would call scalable personalisation. So in the scalable personalisation, that's in terms of learning accounting, but it's applicable to other things. So how can we help people learn accounting skills quicker, better, more effectively, but use less resources? And that's, going back to business skills effectively, of using my business skills to solve that problem, because that's really, I did work on attempting to solve the problem going to the academic literature. But one problem I found in my area, and it's probably not a problem in other areas, but we hear these cliches, was there is some siloing in academia. So even that silos is in what the problems are. So we might want to research into student attrition or student retention. We might want to learn into, how students learn. We might want to research about student engagement. And we can take, and all of those things have valuable lessons. But if we look and you take the step back, we haven't really made that much progress, in the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And I wasn't making the progress that I expected to make. So the realization was I needed a holistic solution. Just becoming the expert in feedback or the expert in attrition or the expert in student approaches to learning was not going to significantly improve the lives of my students. Yep. Because to develop a solution, it required an understanding of all those things. So, that I needed a different conceptual framework for making that decision. And that conceptual framework come from something I use significantly in business. So adapting that, how do you increase the returns of a business? So how do you, increase the returns of a unit, and look at the shareholders almost as the clients? They're both, they're partners. So the people that want to return, well, you've got to give society a return. And that's the return that society gets. Who are the stakeholders? Society needs to get returns, and those returns become that people understand more about making decisions and use resources more wisely. The university needs a return, and that return is, and that's where scalable personalisation comes in. You want people to learn more, but you can't just chew up resources. You've got all these solutions. Those solutions need to be resource sensitive. But most importantly, because they're the people ultimately putting up the funds, are the students. Can they learn this quicker? Can it be a more enjoyable journey? I've still got a fair way to go on this. But I'm making significant progress, and I know what future steps are. But implementation has its cost as well. And you know, in part, one of the beauties of your research is the contribution it has to make in terms of implementation, because you can guide people to where they need to start. You can guide people towards the high return areas. And if you know, in my model of the economic return, that has just an amazing economic return in terms of the resources that it saves in doing things like, I don't know what the scale is, but instead of people having to, you know, righto, they've got the capacity to do 100 experiments.
Yeah.
So you could do these 100 experiments drawn at random, and there might be 3 in there that are of value. But you could potentially say, righto, here's your top 100 experiments, and they might all return a value, or 50 of them might return a value. Could you, or you know, it might only be 20. But could you imagine getting a return out of 20, 50, 80, 100 of your experiments as opposed to 1, 2, or 3? Just the rate would make the progress, and that's a similar issue that I think accounting helps solve. That's a similar issue that I've been, you know, attempting to work on. And in a sense, that's even with my students. So how have I done that on a small scale? And say this is where the big data element comes in. But this is actually small big data. But again, being an accountant, it's recording as much as I can about the students. And look, I developed a thing called a student DNA, which should help me predict. So, you know, what was their preferred representation system? You know, what were their basic math skills when they come in? And then things like what socio-economic area they live in, you know, they're a full-time or part-time student, you know, a whole host of things. And I put that combination together, and it would be very predictive of how a student was going to go. And and the first thing there was I would know the students to target. But in the end, that didn't seem to be the best solution, because again, I've got limited resources. You know, there's other things I could look at. Where I probably got a bigger return was looking at all the student results for all their questions, and you could then, here's a simple way to look at it. You could find where people seem to fail, not do well in certain skills, and then trace that back through a pipeline to see what were the things in common. If people didn't get, they wouldn't pass the unit. And eventually what I did there, so this is, I guess, what you'd call an example of a applied research really, is packaged all those things up, put them in the first 2 topics, and students had to master those topics before they could move on. And so that's just taking all the data, crunching the data, looking at the relationships and saying, righto, these are the outcomes I'm getting. So these are the attention areas. So for me, that's a bit like a far poorer example of what you're doing, but taking the data and saying, the data tells me that we need to address these areas first. If people can get these areas, they've got a chance of passing. If they don't understand these, they will not pass. Now, it still doesn't guarantee they will pass if they get those, but you can move further through the pipeline. And then I guess I've got to find the next blockage and the next blockage. And then we're also, you know, that's some of the challenges we have with research. And, you know, I'm using the de facto of that they pass the unit, that they've got the required skills in accounting.
Yep.
So that's a, you know, a de facto. It's not again, a bit like it's a representation. The map is not the territory.
Yep.
That's what I use as a representation. I'm really saying is the representation I've got for success is true, but you've got to get that you also got to work on getting that representation stronger.
Well, we might talk about your career for a bit now then.
Right.
Your origins as to what led you down the paths of academia, maybe a little bit as to what motivated you to look into NLP, and anything else along the way.
I worked before I went to university, and the first real job I had was with, well, when I started, it was with the PMG, the Postmaster General.
Okay,
And quite early on, they split into Telecom and Australia Post.
Yep.
And I started out as a postal clerk in training, where I learned how to be a postal clerk. And it's interesting. I think back on how some things I learned then, and the way that teaching was structured. Some of the things were not quite that advanced almost at the moment. If I think about one of the things in terms of my, I don't know whether it's I guess an outcome of research has been on-demand exams or on-demand assessment. So, and that recognises that people don't necessarily learn at the same pace. And we talked about motivation if you're making progress, so that students in fact can do their exam in the unit when they feel ready. Well, when we feel they're ready, and they need to go through a number of gateways first. Now, that is seen to have some level of innovation, and it's interesting. I don't see that as being very innovative. I have some ideas that I think are innovative for education, which will make stuff like that look incredibly boring. But effectively doing postal clerk in training course, we had some element of on-demand exams then. And the bit about the on-demand exam, we had to type at 70 words a minute. That sounds pretty fast, but we didn't have punctuation. Of course, one of the roles of a postal clerk was to send telegrams. So we had to be able to type accurately and quickly. And they got to a stage in the study that you would do the tests that have waves of tests. You did the test. When you passed it, you were finished. You'd got that bit of the qualification. You might have still had a few other things to do, because that was the key thing. That's the thing that caused people not to pass. But if you didn't pass the next one, you come back in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And you do it again. And if you didn't pass that, it was another 2 weeks. So that started a long way before the end of, we had a year's training, started a fair way before the end of that. And you might have still had stuff you had to go through, but you knew you'd effectively pass. So that, in a sense, was on-demand exams. I actually, there's a number of things it's interesting. When the PMG split up into Australia Post and Telecom, I think it was called Telecom Australia, I think, that actually had it advanced my career significantly. And in one day, I went from a clerk class 1 to a clerk class 4, because I got moved into the head office. Yep. I applied for a position in there. Now, some of the things that I really got into trouble for, because I did get into a fair bit of trouble as a postal clerk, were the things that effectively got me the job. One of the things I did was one day carried several $100,000 worth of cash.
Yep.
From Redfern Mail Exchange to the, actually, was it the Redfern Commonwealth Bank, or to the Commonwealth Bank anyway, our nearest Commonwealth Bank. And that created a lot of reports for a lot of people, because if it was more than $10,000, it was meant to be an armed escort. So I remember, when I got back to the office, there was police all over the place. The armor guard was there, and a lot of very unhappy people. Now, I got all that stuff done more. The reason I took it, no one told me about stuff. They didn't expect me to get everything finished as quickly as possible. The reason we had so much money was there was a big back pay for people. And they went through the thing to think that people would come down, they would take their pay. It was enormous back pay. There was like many people getting over $1,000. I think way over $1,000. I think, well, that's going to take ages to count out that money, and then they'd have to count it, and that's have to verify that. Now these were only people that were not based at the Redfern Mail Exchange. So but with a bit of planning, I went to see the managers the week before. They come down, did the verification, and actually we decided that people would put their money, all of their money, in the bank. And they could draw some out if they wanted some, and most people didn't want to carry that much money around with them. So they put it all in the bank. So come the end of the day, I didn't have to count up a whole pile of money. I just had to, they're all in their packages. I just had to put in my exercise bag, balance off what I had to do, and then walk to the bank, which is what I did. But that's, I grew up in Tamworth, a regional city. That just didn't seem an issue to me. I just didn't have the knowledge of a city person. I didn't get that was a problem. And still when I got back, I didn't get that was a problem. And look, there was a lot of people thought that was funny. So you do a few things like that, but then, when Australia Post and Telecom Australia split up, they were probably after a different way of doing things. And, I stood out because I had a very thick file. So it was an advantage. And there's lots of, it's interesting to think about structures of business. So when I went in there, even though I went to a level that was what my postmaster was, of the post office I come out of, I was still the absolute junior in the place I went. So being the junior meant I had the desk up the front on the left-hand side. And as you got promoted, well, you'd move back and then you'd move across. And so I worked in, there was open office. Where I worked there was everyone up until my boss was in the room, sitting in the back corner, back left-hand corner, furthest away from the door, where he sat. He could watch everything, and he was a clerk class 9. So that was a pretty senior position. The clerk class 10 had a very big office, and the next level after that was the senior executive, was where the state manager and the directors were. But you just sat, and as you're promoted, you moved back. There's some other things about working then. We had flexi time. So flexi time meant that you had to do your 36 hours and 45 minutes or a week. 7 hours 21 a day. I wonder if that works out there. I remember 7 hours. Yeah, you had to get that. Or actually, you had to get it in a fortnight. You had to get up your time in a fortnight. But the core hours were only 10 to 12 and 2 to 4. That's the only time you had to be at your office, and you could have one flexi day a fortnight as well. So you'd work up extra hours. So, and that made things pretty well. And you wanted to be in there at 10 because every day you want to be in there at 9:30 because the tea lady come around to take the orders starting after 9:30.
Yep.
And so she would be back at 10 and would have everyone in our room would have morning tea together, and it would go for half an hour.
Yep.
But it was really a team meeting. Didn't have to structure a team meeting, didn't have to take notes. And that's where, the boss had actually asked everyone, how you going, what you up to, what's happening, do you need any help here, do you have any ideas? And I had a few ideas and there were some things that could be done far more effectively than they were. My first job was called it's in the building and properties branch. I can't even remember the title, but effectively there was equivalent person to me in Telstra or Telecom.
Yep.
So when PMG split, we had almost all the premises we had people from both Telecom and Australia Post in it. So we had to find some way to divide up the property.
Yep.
So in almost all the properties we had, there was Telstra people, or Telecom people, and Australia Post people. And so what we had to do was rent out space. Property manager, that was my job. Now I remember the title. And so effectively what that was a big spreadsheet, except it was a paper spreadsheet. They were all written on paper for every property, what the area was and all that, how much rent was paid per square metre, what the rent was, and all the properties. Now that was allocated the vast majority of my monthly time, which clearly would have taken you that early. But then, and there was a person in Telecom who did exactly the same thing, except his was reversed to mine. But eventually, we got to agree to say, let's not produce a new one of these each week. Let's leave some lines down the bottom on every page, and we will just do the amendments, and every now and then we'll fix it up. So, we end up setting up, here's the subtotal on each page.
Yep.
What's the changes? What's the true total of this page? And so we didn't have to go through all of that. All we did was effectively did an exception report.
Yep.
And then that freed me up to do other things. So some of the wisdom is, that boss there gave me some advice because it was a fairly new thing, promotions become quite quick.
Yep.
They're all acting positions, and there was a stage I got myself in a role where I had a number of people reporting to me, and I can remember two bits of advice the person that sat in the back corner gave me that were both probably pretty similar, but and I've heard similar ones since, but I was 21 then. And I had some fairly experienced people reporting to me in one of my roles. So that was clearly going to be a challenge with a meeting. So some advice I got, which is is this related to research? I don't know. In a meeting, you want to get your key decisions sorted out before you go to the meeting. Meetings aren't really a place for making decisions.
Yep.
You want to get them sorted, and there's, for a whole host of reasons. You don't want people to be embarrassed. You don't want people to be shocked about things. And so part of that, because I was, some of my meetings could have gone feral. He said, what you need to do in part of that is give everyone a role when you go into a meeting. Because if you don't, they will find their own role.
Yep.
And that's when you'll have problems, when they find their own role. And I guess the one that ties them together, and I don't know whether he exactly articulated it this way, because I remember someone else articulating it later, was, don't know, you know, it was, so in, so what was it about? I thought, so give everyone, oh, yeah, that's, which, yeah, because I said I was thinking something else, which is really true in education as well. So, but it's expressed in slightly different terms. But it was how we'd probably express it now in terms of education is people will remember what they say far more than what you say.
Yeah.
But his guidance was about there. If you want to get some action taken on things, that's why you need to agree on stuff beforehand, and you get people. You help people come up to that realization, which they can express that realization, so they can be committed to making it happen. They can get the reward also for making it happen because it's their idea. It's not some pimply little kid telling them what to do. But it's just, it's really valuable advice even now. And that's, I gave you say example of chunking up. You know, that's advice in those meetings. Well, how did you chunk up a bit? I've had that experience before. How do you get people to remember stuff? How do you get people to do things? Well, they need to discover it themselves. You've got to help them discover it, but they need to discover it themselves. You telling people something is not going to get the action you want. That's a, you know, you want to say a tip for an educator. People will remember things they discover a lot more than the things you tell them. And you know, we've seen lots of bits of paper on things like that. Are they true or not? You know, the cliches that people remember. What is it? 10% of the numbers, and whether they're true or not, but there's relevance in them. People remember 10% of what they say. People remember 10% of what you say. They'll remember 20% of what you say and what they see. People remember 40% of what you say, what you show them, and what they do. And then people remember 80% of something they've got to explain to someone else. Now, those percentages are probably not correct, especially as I just made them up then. But it would be a valuable hierarchy in people learning.
Oh, cool. So after the post.
Oh, after that, was
Masters,
there?
yes.
Well, there was a stage I got there where my career was actually going pretty well. I had started to study then, but I really did come to the realization that that was not the future I wanted. Not working in the centre of Sydney. You know, spending a fair bit of time travelling. I did, you know, I got to the stage of realising unless I got out of Sydney soon, that would be my life.
Yeah.
And you know, it could have worked as a life. You know, because even then I was getting to the stage of saying, I've got to give up a fair bit now, because I'd effectively got to the stage where there was no career path for me in Australia Post in a regional area. Like there's no position I had at the end. There would be no position in a regional area that would have been that high. So that was not a future. And then so I went to university. It probably, look, I did think I'd come back. I took a year off. I got a year's leave to go to university. And you know, I thought I'd come back with a whole host of new ideas that gave me some time to think. but I fell in love in my first year, and that became more important to me than my career.
Okay, since chronologically we're up to you at uni, when you were living on campus, you started the Earle College Coach Run. It has now raised over $500,000 for charity and is still going after over 40 years. Can you tell me more about the motivation behind starting it and what made it special to continue as an ongoing legacy?
The starting, it's one of those things that happen. People were sitting around at university, and apparently I made the statement that even one person could make the world a better place. They just have to get off their bum and do something about it. And someone, Russell Barker, come to me the next day and said, "Brent, you said you're going to make the world a better place, so what are you going to do about it?" And actually, Russell and I sat down and we made a list of things that we could possibly do. One of the things on that list was to do a run and well, I'll go back a step. One of the things that really came up on the list, if we were going to make a significant contribution to the world, where would it be? And we thought, well, it would probably be health. And then we thought if we're going to make a contribution to health, it'd be better to improve the health of children or newborns even, because then they've got their whole life ahead of them, as opposed to someone later in life. And we were trying to make the maximum benefit with very limited resources we'd appreciate we had. And then we sort of got to the idea of prevention is better than cure. And we also appreciate that we probably didn't have the skills to do that. So what we would see if we could do is leverage off someone who did have those skills. And that then led to, well, can we, the way we can help most then is probably moral support, raising profile and raising money. And then we thought that's then led to, I guess, the Coast Run and supporting a charity. The first charity was Foundation 41, which looked into children almost before where they were born. And then we moved on to Children's Medical Research Institute after a few years. Sorry?
Still supporting
CMRI? Still supporting CMRI. Now that'll be 35 years now, I'll be getting very close to CMRI. But to go back and then, and it's the importance of just starting sometimes. There's things you read over a lifetime that in the end become very meaningful. And Goethe said, whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it, because boldness has a certain power and magic about it. And I had not read that then, but that was a Coast Run, was a bit like that. So Russell and I then actually said, we jumped in the car one day and we just drove to the coast. We thought, how do we start this? We thought, where we'd like to run, we'd like to go to the coast. How will we do it? And we thought, well, let's just get in the car and drive there, see what it's like. And I drove, and Russell wrote down every 500 metres, that's flat, that's uphill, sharp corner. We didn't have Google Maps or Strava segments or things then. We had pen and paper. So we mapped out the course that way. So that's how it started. Why do you said, why has it lasted? I think that's really related to the values. Two things. The values is one of them. The value that health and safety was our prime value above everything else. Health and safety for society as a whole. We were looking at children's health, and I think that's a value that most people can ascribe to. For most people, that's probably pretty close to the top of their hierarchy of values. So that was a good value to have. And also, what we did at the time seemed a really big challenge. And I think people will become engaged in something if it's in line with their values. And I think we'd all like to achieve a challenge. It's all like to have something we can look back on and thought, wasn't sure I could do that. And now that the coast runs happen 40 times, you can see that it can happen. But before we did it, we didn't even know that we could get a team together that could run 200 kilometres in 2 days. Because 5Ks seemed a pretty long run then, and that seems a lot of people would have to get to run 5Ks. Now, as it turned out, on the very first day, there was a very high proportion of people had run the most they'd ever done in one go. And some people that had not run more than 5Ks ran more than 10 or 15 just in one go. So it was a big challenge. And if you go out and you do a big challenge and you're working together with other people to achieve something, that's a massive buzz when those two things come together. And I think that's probably why it's lasted. And it's become something that people can rally around. Now, people have gone on since then and done some incredible things with the coast run. And you think that the coast run now is the person organising the coast run has got a big job. It's like a multi-divisional company. So it's not just the coast run. There's the fashion parade, there's the discount card, there's the auction, and there's other activities that are on. So it's like you've got a CEO and he's got all these directors of different departments, and they've all got their responsibilities. So it's a pretty big project for someone to become involved with. Now it's much harder than when I had to do it, and dealing with police and local government to get approvals, and trying to get sponsors on board, trying to motivate people to do things that are not paid. So it becomes a big skill development for a whole host of people that are involved in it. So they're the people that have, made it happen, and it's probably survived because some pretty talented people come along after I was there and just kept developing it. So the coast run become an area that people could rally around. We have talked a bit about the importance of innovation clusters, and that's an example again of what that's. The coast run is what happens when you bring smart, committed people together to do something. Just interesting things happen.
Cool. Could you, I guess, just describe what a typical coast run involves from, say, start to finish?
Well, if you talk about the coast run itself in terms of the run itself, which is only now one component of the coast run, but it typically involves running from Earle College in Armidale to Coffs Harbour. There was a period of time we ran to Nambucca. It's a relay run, two people running together, and basically go out now, and now it's got to the stage where they do mainly 1 kilometre stints. But there is what's called the dream team that goes out early on the first day, because we've got to get to Dorrigo the first day, which is over 120 kilometres. So we need some pretty fast running early on, and now it's become earlier in the year than it once was, and so the days are pretty short, and we can't run when it's dark. So the dream team usually leaves at soon as it gets light, and they try to get in maybe 2 or 3 hours of pretty fast running at pretty fast, probably between 4 and 5 minute Ks. But that's 12K upwards an hour, so they can be 30 to 40 Ks by the 3 hours done. So then there might only be 80 Ks left for the rest of the day. We get to Dorrigo, people stay overnight. We used to just stay in tents, but now there's usually a big hall or somewhere people stay. Next day, run down to Coffs Harbour. It's changed a bit. as time goes, now people run down out to the end of the jetty, and then there's the tradition of jumping off the jetty into the ocean. Well, I guess it's into the bay there, and that's the coast run. Yeah, some of the other significant events is the fashion parade, and it's a lot of fun. The fashion parade. For me as a spectator, a lot of fun. The people go in it, a lot of fun. I've been in it. I don't have so much fun when I'm in a fashion parade, but it's they do a great job. It's a venue with a lot of tables. Several hundred people come along. Great choreographed routines, and local businesses support by providing some of their merchandise to be paraded, and hopefully we get fairly good promotion for those businesses, and that's a pretty big fundraiser. The auction is also a big fundraiser, where was just an auction of people will donate things to us again, and it's, I guess, just an auction to raise money for it. The discount card that was been about for a while, it was also another pretty big money raiser. Talked about 500,000 over time. The biggest year was $40,000, upwards of $40,000. But it's sponsorship is depends how the economy's going to a fair degree. So put a few 40,000 years together and you make big progress. And CMRI has been a fantastic institution to work with, and I think as much as anything, CMRI also love the idea that we're so interested in what they're doing. They're doing some super exciting things, and that we also want to promote. It's not just about getting money for them. We want people to know about the contribution they're making and the things they're doing.
Yeah, and I guess with CMRI, the partnership, I guess, that is formed there, that's helped people get jobs, hasn't it, at CMRI from that partnership?
I think there's people that have gone that have been on the coast run that have ended up working at CMRI. I don't know whether it's just work experience or that, but it's contacts people make generally, and it's what on a bigger scale, it's what universities should be doing as well. Universities should be engaging with industry. And students should be engaging with industry. If there's ways that students can make a contribution to the community, that's a really important thing to do. And if you think about the contribution that Coast Run makes, it's not just about the fact that we raise some money for CMRI, which is so important. It's the enormous skills that people developed by getting involved in it. We talked about where it is now. It's almost like developing a multi-divisional company. So the skills that people develop from doing that, and the fact that people appreciate how important it is to contribute to the community. Our society increasingly is going to become dependent on communities working together, supporting one another. As the world gets bigger, we become increasing population stress. We need to learn how to contribute more, not just how do we make more money out of this? How do we deliver value to society? And when we deliver value, then I guess we've got some right to take some portion of that value. But it's really significant that students, and everyone, but students is a good place to start, is to appreciate you've got a responsibility to contribute value to society and also to learn how to do it. And now, if people have given the opportunity to contribute, basically they will.
Mm.
The vast majority of people will. So, you ask why is Coast Run still going? It's basically because people are decent people. They want to contribute to society. If you give people the opportunity to contribute, they'll contribute.
Yeah, interesting. It's good to know that so many people have seized this opportunity to give back to the community. So we've diverged a little from the story of your career. We'll get back to that. After uni, what did you do?
Then, it was a country life. So then, being an accountant, working in the country, I've already talked a bit about my early career of working with tax and improving business. Because I focused on improving business, there was one organisation which was called the Financial Management Research Centre, which a lot of accounting firms drew information from about how to operate a small business. They had industry specialisations, and so we're always using, I'm working out what to do with the business. We're always using data produced by the Financial Management Research Centre, and we're also, what would the Financial Management Research Centre say about how we address this problem? So a position came up there, and I got that position, and so that then was that path, and it was all about, so what that business did was researched how businesses could operate more effectively, and then we taught people how to do that. And I love that job. It was a great job, and I learned so much about how businesses operated. The things I use now, I still remember so much of the stuff I learned there, and that's probably part of the thing. You really get to know something when you explain it to someone else. And so there was some stuff I explained many times, but you also then had to not only just explain it, but explain it in a way that it was meaningful for them. So it was about the war stories, I suppose, is finding examples of where this worked. It's not just, this is the theory, these are the things. So and become very powerful to a business. So you look at, here's the business life cycle. These are the things that need to be done. This is what's going to happen to your business next. And then, how do you know that? Because it's happened to, all other businesses that have fitted that profile. And some people will take notice and some wouldn't. And you're thankful for the ones that didn't take notice, because then they would come back to you later, because those things you'd say, you need to address this now, or these are the problems you're going to have, they would have those. So that become great. But then, it was in Armidale, and there's not a lot of clients for that in Armidale. So there was an enormous amount of travel. Now, a lot of people would travel into Armidale for the workshops, but there was a lot of travel, and it got to a stage where a third child was coming along, and the decision. What
a pain.
Yeah, and well, the decision was made that it was no longer viable for me to go swanning around the countryside. I needed to get a job in Armidale, and so there was a new entity starting there called the Business Enterprise Centre, which did something really similar. It just worked with helping people that were starting businesses or were having issues with business, either get the business started or get a better return out of that. And I become the first CEO of that business. And that was another really great learning experience. And we grew in size, and the number of people we employed, and that was really enjoyable. But in that process, started up, getting towards the end of that, started up a business with someone I worked with before, which we thought was going to be a part-time business, which was called the Dashboard Company. And it was a pure, what we'd call it, an applied research organisation. So I've talked about the exercise, we'd find out what businesses did, and then we would share that information. Now, the most sharing was in helping businesses improve their performance, but people would also write up a lot about what we did. Was it better exercise was one. What was the impact of age on an organisation? Was it better to be in the country or the city? What was the different structures of an organisation that were better? So it was really, you did the research and then it was applied straight away. And also in identifying problems. You're seeing the problem yourself. And you're seeing it happen over and over again. So we got to say, so then the research questions start to become very clear to you, righto? What causes this problem? How can we know beforehand? What are the leading indicators towards this issue happening? What are the leading indicators when it doesn't happen? And when it does happen, what have people done to solve it? How have they solved it? What are the characteristics of the organisations that solved it? And so that organisation grew pretty rapidly, but in some ways it was a bit of a deja vu. We couldn't stay in Armidale really with that. There's no client base in Armidale. My partner had some great ideas about what he wanted to do. But then we actually just took a time off, because that person that I met in my first year of uni, she had given up her job. She was working in a business. We had working in the business all her time, and she was traveling as well. There was a period there we were pretty bad parents, by a absence and stress, and we then had some time off. We started down another path, which I thought was a pretty good path, and I think history had probably showed that path would have been a great path. We're doing work in the internet, really, as setting up web pages, getting stuff off Google Ads, setting up pages for others. There's lots of ideas we had of how that was going, and that was going pretty well. Well, it was taking us time to grow. It wasn't giving a mammoth return then for the effort we were putting in. It was not an enormous return, but it was growing. And but then sometime in that period, I understand you're going to have an interview with Sarah Pearson a bit later in this process.
Most hopefully. Still have to ask her, but...
Oh, is it? Right. So she has a bit to answer for, I think. So one night we were sitting on our front porch with Sarah Pearson and David Pearson and talking about life, and we sat there for a very long time, and they were talking about the values of an academic life, and Sue come to me, I don't know how much later, I don't know the exact time, and said, I've been thinking about that conversation we had with Sarah and David, and I want to become an academic. So that's what led to the academic path. So I said, righto, well, let's become academics. I'm really like research. I've got, I had a database, so I think of 1,000 businesses. I thought I've got, there's a lot of good stuff I can do there. I did have an idea about a PhD of how the capitalist system is failing society, and what we could do about it. That was the sustainability one.
Is that PhD still ongoing?
No.
No?
So I had a real shock, I guess, and it's something I've alluded to before, that I got into the university and and this is where, whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage, that just about all the income of a university comes from the teaching.
Yeah.
Now, it might be different. Well, I think that's probably pretty true of most universities. So effectively, you've got students that are subsidising all the research. Now, I've got to say to a university that, you know, this is a culture. If you just talk within a university, everyone will think that's a good idea. But that's a real shock when I come into a university. And, you know, it's interesting. There was probably people inside some of our banking institutions that thought some of their behaviours were appropriate. Now, universities are not like that. But I wonder if we did have a Royal Commission into universities, if they would challenge the thought of why do all our students subsidise our research? Now, and so I think of universities, we really do need to address that. I want to talk about an elephant in the room of how, now we know research is important. So how do we get that properly funded? Because, you know, the way it is at the moment, there's probably a portion of research that's done just to produce papers, which is not necessarily significantly contributing to the society as a whole. So to go back, now that's the way I think. And as we said before, you know, we have an internal representation and the map is not the territory. There's a whole host of things I don't understand about all of that. So I accept that my answer does not have to be true. But that is the model of the world I hold. So that's why I say that the focus of my research needs to be something that directly contributes to the people that are paying for that research. So that's why my focus has gone far more down the road of, it is effectively applied research. Now, what can I learn about how people learn? And how do I now apply that information? And it's probably, you know, I've been at it more than a decade, and maybe this is something to do with the 10,000 rule. It would only be the last 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, where the progress has really been coming.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I had to go back. So, you know, if you take Poincaré's model in a very broad sense, you got to do the preparation first. So it probably took me a fair while to do the preparation to absorb all the things that I needed to. Then the incubation, and I would like a bit of incubation period because I haven't really had it. But part of the incubation was stepping back and saying, well, this is not really working. How would I solve this if this was a small business I was working with? And then the illumination came. Well, hold on. This is effectively a business. Here's this, you know, the roles of management. There's Isaac Adizes produced this would be in the 60s, the roles of management. He said there's 4 roles of management we need to carry out. And I've adapted that a bit, but effectively in education, excuse me, there's 4 key roles that we need to carry out. So part of it, I had to get a conceptual framework that would enable the research to work. And so, you know, there's 4 roles, I call it the rent model. So we've got recording, and there's 2 types of recording that we've got to do. We need to, you know, there's the compliance stuff, you know, student attendance and stuff, student grades, and there's the decision-making stuff. So I need to record enough data to know what are students learning. If they don't learn stuff, why are they not learning this? What are the ramifications of not learning this? So it's all that decision-making stuff, but it's also the stuff about their DNA. What are the characteristics that are likely to lead people to learn this stuff easily and not? So that's the recording. Then there's the environment. which is effectively the learning environment. So that could be the face-to-face or the online. And for me, I've put the majority of the effort into the online, even though in a sense my experience prior to university was in, face-to-face teaching, giving workshops, the consulting was a lot more about the face-to-face, but the online provided the scalable personalisation. And I'm going to deviate a bit and then jump back, because sometimes it's said, what's your research on at the moment? The most collaborations I've been doing this year has been about the impact of COVID and how that's changed the way we teach, how that's changed the way we assess. What have we learned about our students and our duty of care we have to students in that time? So, that's something that has been for the last few months pretty consuming, but that would be consuming for a lot of academics. I know that because I'm probably working with a lot. And the other thing is that that's also applicable to business generally, because we are going to move to a more is it online world, digital world? People won't want to go back to their working. So there's a whole new set of skills that people are going to have. So that's a big deviation. Then in the rent model, there's the 4 areas we need to look at. Is needs. So the biggest need is what do we deliver to society? What's our role in society when I'm teaching this? What contribution is it making to society? And for me, that's about the future of the planet. But for mostly in terms of academics, that stuff's sort of given to us before we start, because there's all that assumed knowledge and we have learning objectives that we start with. So that's one part of the needs, to deliver these learning objectives. But we also have the needs of the student. That's particularly how we need to structure things so that they'll learn better. And I've talked about this before. It's understanding the internal representation, and then how do we pack that back? And the final area is the T, is for team. But education, like all things, it's research. It's a team activity. It's not something a person can do by yourselves, and apart because you need such a different variety of skills, a different variety of thinking. We know we learn so much stuff when we talk to others about it. How we've got to write stuff down and we learn about it. And also in a university, we're in a unique position that our students are also effectively part of the research team, because unless they provide us feedback, we're going to have big hunks of mixed stuff. So what was that question to? That answer to?
It was coming off are you still doing that PhD?
All right, no. So that I guess I just explained my conceptual framework, and that I needed that to do a scalable personalisation.
Yeah.
How do you? So what I think is crucial, how do we structure things so that students can learn more quickly, and we use more resources? Can I teach just effectively with 100 students, or 1,000 students, or 10,000 students, or 15,000 students, or 50,000 students? 50,000 is getting a bit hard. I can imagine up to 10,000 that is not going to use, certainly not, the marginal cost is going to be very low for each additional student we add. And so that means you can invest a lot more in the resources you have, so to teach better and better. So the more students you get, ultimately, the better experience each student will have. Yeah. And these are, they're probably signs of changes that universities are going to have. We have been operating very inefficiently. for a long time. And the government sort of realised that. They think they're not getting bang for buck, and I think they're probably going to use COVID as an opportunity to have a bit of some forced change.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of NI in the Future. Brent and I will continue our discussion in the next episode by discussing the importance of soft networks and clusters of competence, before diverging onto the topic of creativity and an interesting meeting technique called the 6 thinking hats. If anything from today's episode sparked an idea, or you'd like to find out more, I'd love to hear about it. So leave a comment on YouTube, find me on Twitter, rate the podcast, or visit niinthefuture.com to get in contact. I look forward to you joining us for the next episode. So keep an eye on the future for when it comes out.